James William, and I never imagined that one day I would hear from my own daughter. This house is now theirs. You have nothing else to do here. Tell me something. Have you ever built something with so much love that just remembering it, your chest tightens? What if someone within your own family took it from you, like you're just an obstacle in the way? The truth is that no one teaches us to deal with the ingratitude of those we raise with our own hands. I was a husband, father, provider, ground, and in the end, I was treated like an invader in my own history. Maybe you're here because you felt that lump in your throat too, that feeling of having been left aside, without a clear why. Or maybe you're just curious to understand what leads a daughter to take from her own father what he built with the woman he loved. Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you how it all happened, from the first sentence to the last silence. And in the end, you'll understand what a man like me does, when the pain is too great to scream but strong enough not to forget. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. Not every war starts with shouting. Some begin with a sentence said without looking them in the eye. It was like that with me. I traveled to spend a quiet weekend at my lake house, the same house I built with Elizabeth, my wife. But when I got there, I found my daughter on the porch holding hands with her husband. She looked at me with a coldness that I had never seen before and said, "This house now belongs to Evan's parents. You're not allowed to come here anymore." I didn't answer. Not at that moment, but something inside me ignited. A new, heavy silence, and the desire not to disappear quietly. If you've come this far, if this story has already touched a place in there, I ask you from the heart, leave your like, subscribe to the channel. It's not by number, it's by support. Sometimes we just need to feel that we are not alone when we decide to tell something that still hurts. And it hurts. But I'll tell you, everything, until the end. I arrived at the villa around 2 in the afternoon. The sky was clear. The sun reflected on the lake in a way that always gave me peace. I had been driving since early on, with the suitcase in the back seat and the thought far away. I was thinking of Elizabeth. She loved that house. We called it our refuge. I remember her taking care of the front yard, arranging the stones with that whim of her own. It's got to be beautiful, James. Not to show off to others, but because we deserve to live in a beautiful place. It was with her that I planted each flower, that I chose each wood from the deck. Each nail in that house carries a piece of my history. I parked the car slowly, with that usual care not to scare the squirrels that were on the fence. I took my leather suitcase, the old one, which I used even on my honeymoon, and climbed the steps of the balcony. But I stopped at the second. Ashley was there, seated in a white bathrobe, with a glass of wine in her hand. Next to her, her son-in-law, Evan, also in a bathrobe, laughing at something she said. That confused me. I thought it was a coincidence. I thought, maybe they came to spend a single day. I let you know that I've arrived and everything is fine. But when she saw me, she didn't smile. He didn't run to hug me. He didn't even get up. "Dad, you didn't warn me you were coming," she said in a tone that made me tremble inside. I replied quietly, "This is my house, Ashley. I always come on Sundays. You know that." She looked at Evan as if asking for strength and then let out the phrase that I still hear to this day. "We are here for a romantic weekend. You're getting in the way. We wanted to be alone." I was speechless, still with the suitcase in my hand, not understanding if it was real or some kind of joke. But it wasn't. I tried to get past her. He said he was just going to go inside, prepare a coffee, rest a little. But she got up. It stopped in front of me. "Dad, please, go away. This house now belongs to Evan's parents. They need it more than you do." At the time, I felt my body freeze, as if the air had disappeared. The suitcase slipped out of my hand. It didn't fall. Alone. He went down to the ground like me. You know that feeling of not knowing where you are? To feel that everything has suddenly become strange? That place, which for so many years had been my shelter, now seemed hostile to me, as if I were an intruder. She didn't scream. But he didn't ask for it with affection either. It was an order. And Evan next to her just crossed his arms. He said nothing. Not a let him in. That's when I understood. They had been there for a long time. It was not the first time. The house, my house. It had already become their territory. And I, the old owner, was just an inconvenient memory that appeared to disturb the comfort of those who arrived later. I took the suitcase. I didn't look at her anymore. I went down the steps slowly, trying not to fall. The sun was still shining on the lake, but to me everything looked gray. I started the car, and I left. In silence, without shouting, without crying. But inside, something died at that moment. Allow me to pause here, because maybe you felt something similar. Maybe someone you created, helped, protected, today look at you as a nuisance. And if you've been through this, if you've ever had to swallow your pride so as not to beg for respect, comment below, please. He only writes, "I've lived it," or "It touched me." It will do me good to know that I am not the only one. That night back in San Diego, I sat in the living room armchair until dawn, the full glass of water in hand without drinking, the mute cell phone, the TV turned off. Just the sound of my heavy breathing and the image of Elizabeth on the balcony of the villa, laughing in the sun, coming back endlessly in my head. I didn't sleep, but that morning, in the midst of the pain, something began to light up inside me, and it wasn't hate. It was a question that kept echoing. How did my daughter have the courage to do that to me? And the answer, I started to find it the next day. But this, I'll tell you in the next part, because what came next, it was even harder to swallow. 2 days passed, 2 long days full of silence. I couldn't eat properly nor sleep. I sat there in the armchair in the office, staring at the bookshelf that Elizabeth had so carefully organized. Each title seemed to look back at me asking, "What happened to you, James?" It was then that the phone rang. The sound seemed to cut the air out of the house. I looked at the viewfinder. It was Ashley. My heart beat faster, mixed between hope and fear. I answered in a calm voice, trying to believe that she was calling to apologize. "Hi, daughter," I said, but her tone made me feel a chill inside. "Dad, listen carefully. The lake house is now in the name of Evan's parents. They need it more than you do. As of today, you are forbidden to go there." For a second, I thought I had heard it wrong. "What do you mean, forbidden?" "Ashley, that house is mine. It's in my name. I built it." She cut me off without hesitation. "You're old, Dad. He barely uses that place. It makes no sense to keep holding a property of this size for yourself. Evan's parents are struggling, and we've decided they're going to live there." "We decide." Those 2 words hit me like a sentence. I tried to stay calm. "Ashley, you can't just give something that doesn't belong to you. The house is mine." She gave a short, dry laugh, which didn't seem like hers. "You don't understand, Dad. We just want to do what's right. You have other houses, other places. They have nothing." Her voice was that of someone who was reading a text that someone dictated. I could almost hear Evan's presence on the other side, blowing what she was supposed to say. "Ashley," I said, "do you think that doing what is right is stealing from the one who gave you everything?" Silence. Just her breathing. Then came the final blow. "Mommy would be ashamed of you." I closed my eyes. This phrase, said so coldly, was the blow that I could not dodge. Elizabeth. Her name used as a weapon. "Don't talk about your mother like that, Ashley," I replied, my voice cracking. "She loved you, and he taught you to have respect." But on the other end of the line, only came the icy answer, "Goodbye, Dad." And the phone went silent. I stared at the blank screen, not believing that the call was over. The sound of the clock on the wall became deafening. Every tick echoed inside me. I got up slowly, walked to the table and sat in front of Elizabeth's photo. It was our last trip before she fell ill, the 2 of us smiling on the deck of the house, the lake in the background. "Did you see that, Liz?" I muttered. "Our girl. What happened to her?" I ran my hand through the glass of the frame, as if I could touch her face. And it was there, in that office solitude, that a memory came like a wave. The birthdays I never missed, the wedding I paid for in full, the car I gave as a gift, the check I signed to cover her first apartment. Every memory came with a bitter taste. I realized for the first time that in each gesture of love of mine, she learned to ask for more, not to thank her. The phone vibrated again. Another message. I already knew who it was. I read with teary eyes. "You don't need to call again, Dad. They are moving over the weekend. It's the right thing." "Is that it?" "No, I love you. No, I'm sorry. Just the final order." I put the phone face down and let my body fall back on the chair. The room was dark, only the streetlight coming in through the window. And it was in this darkness that I realized that something inside me had broken for good. I had already lost my wife. Now I was losing my daughter, alive, but distant. The pain of losing someone who is still breathing is the hardest of all. because it never ends. And that night, sitting in silence, I understood that nothing would ever be the same again. But something in me also ignited. A kind of small flash, almost imperceptible but stubborn. And if the house was still mine, if she thought she could erase me like that, maybe it was time for me to remember who I was before I bent so much, before giving everything to be loved. I looked at Elizabeth's picture once more and whispered, "Liz, give me strength because I think it's time to wake up." And it was there, in the middle of the silence of that cold house, that a decision began to be born within me, and it would change everything that would come after. After that call, the house seemed to get smaller. The sound of the clock, which used to keep me company, turned into a hammer. I walked slowly to the room where I keep everything that was left of my life with Elizabeth. It is a room that almost no one enters. The smell of old wood, the beige curtains she sewed, and a blue box on top of the closet full of photos, letters, and souvenirs that I never had the courage to throw away. I opened the lid and time began to turn back. The photos were a little yellowed, but each one of them still looked alive. Me, with a plaid shirt and hammer in hand, building the deck of the lake house. Elizabeth in a hat, holding a clipboard and giving orders, as she always did. And Ashley, small, laughing, with hands dirty with dirt. I remember that day she helped me plant a cherry tree in front of the porch. "For when I get married, Dad," she said. I laughed, finding the innocence funny. And she added, "I want to get married here," with the lake in the background. The memory pierced me like a blade. Now that same daughter, who dreamed of getting married there, had handed over the place to her husband's parents. I sat on the edge of the bed with the photo in my hand, and I felt a huge weight on my chest. Elizabeth's voice came as a whisper. "Bear with her, James. She's just different. I always have. Too patient." Maybe my patience was what taught her that she could hurt me without consequence. The pain did not come from the loss of the house. It came from disrespect, from breaking something I never thought I could break. I ran my finger over Ashley's face in the photo and wondered at what point she stopped seeing me as a father to see me as an obstacle. The truth is that I didn't know how to see the signs. I always disguised disappointments. I remember when she would borrow money from me and I would give it, even though I knew I wouldn't come back. When I missed birthdays, I made excuses for others. "She's busy, poor thing," I said. I always defended her, even when she didn't deserve it. And maybe that's why she never understood the weight of the words she said to me. I got up, went to the mirror. The face that looked back at me looked different. Her hair thins, her eyes sunken, her chin trembling. A man who gave everything and took nothing. The tear came on its own without warning. It flowed slowly, without noise, as if he had asked for permission. I didn't cry out loud. I just let the tears come down, in silence, like a man who is tired of trying to be strong all the time. Because there are cries that cannot be heard, but that hurt more than any scream. I stayed there still until my body got tired. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, where the dim streetlight drew shadows. I thought about calling someone, an old friend maybe, but who would believe me? Everyone thought Ashley was an exemplary daughter. "Your girl is a source of pride, James," they told me, and I smiled, pretending it was true. Deep down, I think I was ashamed to admit that I had lost the only thing that really mattered, her love. I could rebuild the house. The bond is not. At dawn, I got up and went to the kitchen. I made coffee, even though I wasn't hungry. The smell reminded me of family Sundays. Elizabeth buttered the bread, Ashley helping set the table. I tried to stay calm, but my heart seemed to beat out of rhythm. I wanted to understand what I had done wrong. Did I love too much? Could it be that trying to protect, I ended up teaching not to respect? These questions swirled in my head like flies that wouldn't let me sleep. I went back to the room, sat down again in front of the photos. In one of them, I held Ashley in my lap. She must have been about 6 years old. Her smile was the same as I saw when there was still affection, before Evan came into our lives. It's not that he was evil at first. He was just ambitious. And I, silly, thought I was helping my daughter to live better. I saw in him a son I never had. Today I understand. I fed the snake with my bare hands. The dawn passed slowly. When I realized the day was already dawning, the sun came in through the cracks in the curtain, but I felt dark inside. The memories came like razors, each one cutting a different piece of my hope. Elizabeth, Ashley small, the sound of laughter, the smell of cake coming out of the oven. All of this now seemed like another life. I closed the box of photos, but one of them escaped and fell to the floor. It was Ashley, at age 8, sleeping on my lap. Behind the photo, her shaky handwriting, "To Dad, my hero." That destroyed me. I held the photo close to my chest as if holding the last piece of myself. I stood there in silence for hours, and in that silence I realized something I had never admitted. She no longer saw me as a hero. Maybe he would never see it again. But a part of me still believed that the truth needed to come out, and for that I would have to put my heart aside and start thinking with my head, because if I wanted to regain my dignity, I could not continue to be the man who only waited for time to heal. I had to act. And that morning, as I closed that box for the last time, I decided that I would no longer be the victim of the story that I had built myself. But what I found out soon after, it was much worse than I imagined. That morning, the cell phone vibrated on the table. The screen lit up and her name appeared. I hesitated for a moment before opening the message. It was short, direct, cold as ice. "You don't have to go back there anymore. They are renovating everything." I stared at those words, standing still as if they were nails driven into my chest. Renovating everything. My house, my home, the living memory of the woman I loved. It was as if she had sent to say, "I deleted you." I didn't answer. I wouldn't even have anything to say. The silence that followed was worse than any discussion. I felt the weight of emptiness in every corner of the house. I walked to the window and watched the city below. Cars passing by, people in a hurry, lives happening. And there I was, standing there, like a forgotten portrait on the wall. For the first time, I felt that I no longer had a place in the world. Everything I've been, everything I've built, it seemed to be useless. The house was just the symbol of what I had lost inside. I sat on the couch and stared at my hands. The same hands that raised walls, held Elizabeth until her last breath, paid for schools, plans, trips. What now? What did these hands have to hold? Nothing. Only the air. Only loneliness. I tried to read a book. I couldn't. I turned on the television, left it on at low volume, just to deceive the silence. But silence is not fooled. He always comes back, higher. I thought about selling everything. Go away. Disappear. Maybe to some small town, where no one knew me, where I could be just another old man having coffee on the sidewalk. For a moment, this thought seemed to give me relief. But then I closed my eyes and saw Elizabeth's face. The memory of her appeared so clearly that it gave me a lump in my throat. I heard her saying, as in that last conversation in the hospital, "Promise you won't give up on life, James." And I promised. So as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't disappear. But the pain was too deep to fit me. I spent the next few days as a ghost inside my own house. He didn't receive visitors, he didn't answer the phone, he didn't open the curtains. The neighbors might have thought I had traveled, but I was there, trapped inside myself. Sometimes I would walk into the bedroom, open the drawer, and pick up the watch Elizabeth gave me on their 30th wedding anniversary. I watched the hand move, slowly, as if mocking me. Time was following, not me. The hours passed, the days mixed. When night came, I would sit on the porch and stare at nothing. I thought about everything I did right, and yet, how it all went wrong. Being a father, I discovered too late, is no guarantee of being loved. It's a gamble, and sometimes we lose. I wondered many times what would have happened if I had been tougher, firmer. But that's not in my nature. I've always been the kind of man who settles things quietly, and in that silence, I got lost. On Monday, I received another message, this time from an unknown number. It was a photo, the house, my house, and on the porch, a ladder leaning against it, paint cans, men working. The caption read, "They're already leaving it their way, in their own way." Those 3 words broke me for good. I felt my whole body freeze, short breathing. I got up, walked around the house like a trapped animal. I grabbed my coat, opened the door, but stopped. Where would I go? I had nowhere else to go. The lake house, which was my refuge, was now theirs. And the rest? The rest meant nothing else. It was at that time that I realized that rock bottom is not a physical place. It is a state of mind. That's when you understand that for those you love the most, you have become invisible. I sat down again without strength, and I cried. Not the contained crying of before, a heavy cry of a tired man, of whom he held too much. I cried for myself, for her, for everything, and when the tear was over, I was empty. The only thing that moved was the clock on the wall. Elizabeth would have hugged me. She would have told me to breathe. But all that remained of it was the sound of my own memory. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. If you're listening, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel because I still have a lot of things saved to tell you. Sometimes, all an old man needs is to feel that someone, somewhere, is still listening to him. When the sun came up, I sat down at the table with a cup of coffee and a quiet decision began to grow inside me. I couldn't let it end like this. I couldn't let Elizabeth's name be erased from that place. If she was right, if there was something beyond this world, then she would see what I would do next. Because that morning, for the first time in weeks, I felt that the pain was about to turn to strength. And what I found out after that night, it was the beginning of the turnaround that no one expected. I woke up early that day, before the sun rose. The body is still heavy, but the head, different. I can't explain it for sure, but there was a new calm inside me. It wasn't anger, it was focus. A kind of clarity that pain sometimes brings when we have cried everything we could. I got up, made coffee and sat at the table, watching the steam rise from the cup. It was there that I thought, if they want to erase me, I must first remember who I am. And I'm not a man to scream nor to beg. I am a man who builds. And maybe it was time to rebuild. Not a house, but the respect they took away from me. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Marcus, my lawyer for more than 20 years. James, is that okay? He asked in that sleepy voice. Marcus, I need to see you today. It's about the lake house. I want to protect what's still mine. He was silent for a few seconds, then replied, Sure, meet me at the office at 10. I hung up and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. I went to the home office, dusted off the old folders, and started looking for the documents of the villa. Every roll I found felt like an anchor pulling me back to myself. The original deed signed by me and Elizabeth, proof of purchase of the land, construction receipts. Everything was there, all in my name. I remembered when Elizabeth insisted on putting her name together. I refused, saying, Liz, if anything happens to me, it's all yours anyway. And she replied, I trust you. And he really trusted. Until the end. That cut me again, but now the pain was accompanied by purpose. I took a pen, took notes, set dates. I wanted to be ready for the meeting. At 10 o'clock, I parked the car in front of Marcus's office, an old building in downtown San Diego. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a curious look. I haven't seen you in a while, James. Are you okay? I shook my head, not smiling. No, but I'm going to stay. We sat down, and I told them everything. Every word Ashley said, every detail of the message, even the photo of the renovation. Marcus listened in silence, taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. James, listen. Legally, the house remains yours. No transfer was made. If someone is renovating without authorization, it is invasion of property. I kept quiet. He continued, but we need to tread carefully. Any wrong step can turn against you. She is still his daughter, and justice does not look at emotions. It looks at papers. I looked at him and said, Marcus, I don't want revenge, I just want what's mine. And I want her to learn without me having to raise my voice. He smiled slightly. This you have always known how to do well. We spent hours reviewing documents, adjusting dates, creating an updated ownership record. He suggested installing a monitoring system to record any irregular activity on the property. I agreed. I left the office feeling that, for the first time, I had a direction. On the way back, I stopped at a small cafe, one of those that almost no one enters. I ordered a double espresso and watched people through the window. Life went on, and no one there knew that, on the other side of the city, an old man was picking up the pieces to get up. I felt like writing. I took out a napkin and wrote down a phrase that came to mind. Silence is the most elegant way to say, I'm still here. I kept the paper in my pocket. In the afternoon, at home, I opened the laptop and started scanning the documents. I knew I needed to think like them, with strategy, not emotion, but it was impossible not to remember Elizabeth in every detail. The way she organized the folders, the way she folded the bills to fit neatly in the file folders. I could almost hear her voice. James, the world is noisy, but justice likes silence. And she was right. Night fell, and I was still working. I didn't notice the time passing. When I looked at the clock, it was almost 11. I went to the balcony and looked at the dark sky of San Diego. The distant lights reminded me of the reflection of the lake, and it was there, looking into the void, that I realized something important. I didn't need to fight to prove anything to her. I needed to do it for myself, by Elizabeth, for the memory of the life we built. I picked up my phone and looked at Ashley's last message, the one where she said, "They're reforming everything." I smiled in the corner and muttered to myself, "No, my daughter, I'm the one who will renovate." I turned off my cell phone, went in and sat down again at the table. I took the napkin with the phrase I had written earlier and placed it in the middle of the document folder. It was my reminder that anger passes but dignity remains. I knew that this plan would require patience. I couldn't make a mistake. I could not act moved by pain. And it was at that very moment that a notification lit up on my computer screen. A new email coming from an address I hadn't seen in years. The sender made me freeze. It was the son-in-law. And the subject of the message said only, "You will not like what you will see." Evan's email was short, almost cheeky. No hello, no James. Just a line and an image attached. "You won't like what you see." I opened the file with a heavy heart, and there it was. The facade of my lake house covered in scaffolding, windows torn off, the deck destroyed. They were ripping every memory of me out of there, as if they wanted to erase me along with the walls. I felt my blood boil, but I didn't scream. I closed the computer and stood still, silently, looking at my own reflection on the erased screen. It was there that I realized this was no longer a problem of love. It was a matter of respect. And respect, when it is taken away, only recovers firmly. The next morning I returned to Marcus's office. He received me with that look that mixes concern and curiosity. Did I bring the photos? Brought. I placed the laptop on the table and showed them one by one. He watched silently until he said, "Legally, they have no right to reform anything. The property is still in your name. No transfer was made." I asked, "So she lied?" He replied calmly, "She lied, or was manipulated. But in fact, there is no document at all. But we need to act fast, James. If they remain in place, they may try to create indirect possession. And then, it would complicate things." I took a deep breath. "What do I do?" He opened the drawer and pulled out a notepad. First, officially register the house as an untouchable asset. Second, to initiate an extrajudicial notification process. Third, put cameras, sensors, everything that proves improper movements. I agreed with every word. It was no longer the time to mourn. It was time to act. I left there and went straight home. I opened the old folders, scattered the documents on the living room table. Here were years of my life. Blueprints, contracts, receipts, handmade drawings of Elizabeth. She always liked to participate in everything. I found a draft with her handwriting. "Bigger window to see the sunset. James, don't skimp on that detail." I read it aloud, as if she were next to me. I felt like laughing and crying at the same time. Each line of those plants was more than construction. It was love materialized. I spent hours there, among papers, souvenirs, and cold coffee, until I understood that what I was about to do was not revenge. It was a way to preserve the history that she and I had written together. It was about memory, and about not allowing neglect to turn her into ruin. When the sun began to set, the office was covered in documents, post-its, notes. I had a plan, but I knew the enemy was subtle. Evan wasn't the type to scream. He smiled as he destroyed. And Ashley, blinded by vanity, didn't even realize how much she was being used. I picked up the phone and called a security company. "I need a complete system for a house in Lake Tahoe," I explained, "with remote monitoring, sensors, and automatic recording." The technician asked, "Do you want the system to alert in the event of an intrusion?" I replied, "I want him to see everything, and that he shows me who steps where he shouldn't." I hung up and stood up, looking at Elizabeth's picture on the wall. "Liz," I said quietly, "I think the game has changed now." That night I prepared a digital folder with copies of everything. I sent it to Marcus with a simple note. "Protect this as if it were my life." And in a way, it was. The next day, I sat down at the table to review every detail of the scripture. I saw my name printed in firm letters, dated 28 years ago. James Williams, owner. That sentence seemed to give me breath. It was as if the paper said, You're still here. And it's funny how, even after so long, I still heard Elizabeth's voice guiding me in my decisions. Justice likes those who are calm, James. Leave the noise to the fools. And that's what I intended to do. Silence and precision. Because I had already understood that sometimes the most elegant way to fight is to become unpredictable. If you've come this far with me, it's because you feel the weight of this story as much as I do. And believe me, what comes after will surprise you. Because at that very moment, while I was preparing the papers to defend what was mine, something I didn't expect began to take shape. A discovery that was not in any document, but that would change everything I thought about that betrayal. And when I found out what was really behind it, I realized that the pain was just the beginning. The messages started coming in the middle of the afternoon, while I was going through some papers in the office. Ashley's name lit up on the screen, and for a moment, my heart wanted to believe that she had changed her tune, that maybe it was an apology, an attempt to talk as before, but it wasn't. Evan's parents are going to move in Sunday. They have already bought new curtains. I read that sentence slowly, as if chewing something bitter. New curtains. The detail destroyed me, because no one buys new curtains for a place where they intend to stay for a short time. They were planning to live there, make my home theirs. And the worst thing is that she spoke of it with the naturalness of someone who comments on the climate. It was as if I had been erased from history, and her silence between one message and another screamed more than any offense. I rested my hands on the table, felt the weight of the years, but also something different starting to grow inside me. I knew I didn't have much time. Sunday was just around the corner, and if I didn't act now, it would be too late. I picked up the phone and, without thinking too much, called Derek, my neighbor. Derek was one of those guys who wouldn't sit still. Engineer, curious, tech-savvy. I had helped him once when his basement flooded after a storm. He never forgot. "James, it's been a while, man. Is that okay?" he said excitedly. "More or less, Derek. I need your help with a project, technical." He laughed. "When you talk like that, it seems dangerous." I took a deep breath. "Let's say it's a way to protect what's mine." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, then he replied, "I can stop by today." When he arrived, he had that youthful enthusiasm in his eyes, always curious. I explained the situation in a few words. The house, the invasion, the disrespect. He listened without interrupting, shaking his head. When I finished, he leaned back on the couch and said, "So you want the house to speak for you?" I looked at him, seriously. "Exactly." He smiled, but not mockingly. It was admiration. "You can do it. I have sensors, automation systems, hidden cameras. We can turn the place into a kind of fortress, but intelligent. No violence, Derek. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want them to feel what it's like to walk into a place that doesn't belong to them." Understood. A house that defends itself. The way he said it made me shiver. That was exactly it. A house that defended itself. We spent hours talking about details, equipment, possibilities. He spoke with a twinkle in his eyes, as if it were a challenge worthy of his time. I wrote everything down in a notebook. Every sensor, every voice command. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than pain. I felt purpose. When he left, the house seemed more alive. I walked through each room, looking at the walls, the windows, the corridors. I remembered Elizabeth hanging up the curtains, Ashley running barefoot, laughing, asking to swim in the lake. Now that same space would be the stage for another story, one that I never wanted, but that fate pushed me to tell. I leaned against the window frame and said softly, "Liz, I tried everything to keep the peace. Now I just want them to learn. The truth is that there are pains that do not heal over time. They only change shape. My pain was turning into action. And sometimes we need to get up not to beat someone, but to remember who we are. If you've been through this, if one day you felt that something you built with your heart was taken away, comment there. I understand, because I know you understand." The next day I spoke to Marcus again. I told him about the security plans, and he just said, "As long as everything is documented and doesn't involve direct contact, it's no problem." And so I did. I called Derek. We scheduled to go to Lake Tahoe together on Wednesday. He would bring all the equipment and I would bring my calm. The journey was silent, the kind of silence that precedes storms. Derek talked about motion sensors and remote control by app, but I only thought about one thing. When I crossed that road again, I would no longer be the man who left humiliated. He would be the owner of the place, in law, in reason, and in spirit. When we arrived, the lake reflected the late afternoon like a mirror. Derek looked at the house and whistled. "Too beautiful to be taken like this," I just replied, "and it will remain mine." We entered, and the air inside seemed heavy with memories and pent-up anger. He began to install the devices with precision. Sensors in the doors, discrete cameras, lights that reacted to movement. With each tool sound, I felt a small part of me being restored. "It will work perfectly, Mr. Williams. When they enter, the house will talk to them." I smiled for the first time in a long time. "That's what I want, Derek. Let the house speak for me." When we finished, it was already night. The stars reflected on the lake and the cold wind beat on the trees. I stood on the porch looking at the water and thought, sometimes fate just wants to see if we still have the courage to fight for what is ours. And what happened on Sunday, when they finally arrived at my house, proved that I still had it, because that day it was the house that spoke, and no one was prepared for what she had to say. We arrived in Lake Tahoe on a cold morning, the kind of cold that seems to hold secrets in the air. The sun was not yet strong, and the lake was calm, as if waiting for something to happen. I got out of the car first, took a deep breath, and that smell of pine mixed with the memory of Elizabeth hit my chest. It had been a long time since I had stepped foot there without feeling pain, but that day, I felt purpose. Derek came out of the trunk carrying the boxes with equipment, talking fast, excited, as if he was about to make a great invention. "It will work out, Mr. Williams. As soon as they cross the door, the house will respond by itself. Lights, sound, movement, everything automated." I just nodded, observing the facade that once seemed welcoming and was now a silent fortress. "It's always been a living home, Derek. All that was missing was a voice." He smiled. We started working early in the morning. The silence was broken only by the sound of tools, the wind beating on the trees, and my memories. As he installed motion sensors on the ceiling, I watched the windows, remembering when Elizabeth first hung the curtains. She said that the house needed to breathe. And now, in a way she would never have imagined, she was going to breathe, but with the strength of someone who has learned to defend herself. Derek was talking about cables, code, configurations. I listened attentively, but deep down it was another kind of engineering that moved me, that of silence. When the first system was tested, I was impressed. The lights immediately responded to our movement, flashing in patterns that would disorient anyone. Derek adjusted the sounds. Footsteps coming from the hallway, voices whispering, "You shouldn't be here," and even the distant noise of doors opening. "Everything synchronized with the sensors," he explained. "Each step of them triggers a new response. The house literally reacts." We tested it again, and the voice assistant sounded for the first time, with my speech tone recorded. "This house belongs to James Williams. Leave now." Hearing my own voice echoing through the walls gave me goosebumps. It was as if the house itself had decided to speak for me. Derek noticed. "Scary, right?" "No," I replied. "It's fair." We spent the whole day fine-tuning the details. We installed projectors that cast shadows on the walls, human figures that moved when someone entered a certain room. We put in hidden cameras, emergency lights that flashed red when the system was triggered, and software that would send the alert to my phone as soon as someone walked through the door. "Everything cool, everything clean," Derek assured. "Nothing that breaks the law. It's just technology reacting to intruders." "Perfect," I murmured. No screaming, no confrontation. In the afternoon, when the sun began to fall behind the mountains, the house looked different. It was the same villa that Elizabeth and I had built, but now there was a different energy in it. Steady, silent, watchful. Derek finished programming the main system and showed me the control panel on the tablet. "Here you activate and deactivate the safe mode. And if you want, you can watch the cameras in real time." I touched the screen and saw the image of the deck, the living room, the kitchen. Everything is perfectly clear, even from a distance. "Derek, you're an artist," he laughed. "An artist of digital revenge." "Not revenge," I corrected. "Teaching. I just want them to understand the value of what they step on." We were silent for a while. Twilight painted the lake with colors of copper and violet. Derek looked around and said, almost respectfully, "You know, Mr. Williams, this house seems to feel what you feel. It's beautiful, but you can feel that she's wounded." Agreed. "Maybe the day after tomorrow she will heal a little." When we finished everything, it was a closed night. We tested the system one last time. Derek walked through the door and the lights reacted instantly. first flashing, then emitting a sequence of low-pitched sounds that made the floor vibrate. The artificial voice echoed firmly, "You are trespassing on private property. Leave the place immediately." He jumped back, startled, and started laughing. Yes, if I were them, I wouldn't even take 2 steps in here. I just watched. The plan was complete. I didn't need to raise my voice or get my hands dirty. The house itself would be in charge of teaching the limit. We left together, and before locking the door, I looked inside one last time. The dim light in the room reflected off the furniture and the picture of Elizabeth hanging on the wall. "Liz, the house will defend itself," I muttered. And so did I. Derek put the boxes in the car and held out his hand to me. "Sunday they come, right?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "And when they cross that door, they will know what respect is." We got in the car and hit the road back to San Diego. The silence on the way was heavy but not uncomfortable. I looked out the window and thought about everything that was to come. The clock was 9:30 p.m. when I saw the reflection of the city in the distance. "Derek," I asked, breaking the silence, "what if they come back later?" He smiled confidently. "They won't want to come back, Mr. Williams, you bet." And I believed it, because deep down I knew. On Sunday, that house would cease to be a symbol of pain to become the stage for the quietest and most powerful lesson of my life. But what happened that morning? It was beyond anything I imagined. Sunday dawned with a strange blue sky, one of those that seemed too calm before a storm. I woke up before 6, made strong coffee, and sat in front of the computer. The villa's cameras were all active, small screens, but each showing a corner of the house that I knew like the back of my hand. The lake in the background looked like a mirror, reflecting a piece that I knew was about to end. At 9:57, I heard the sound of the engine. The white minivan appeared on the gravel road, slowly climbing to the entrance. I took a deep breath and let my finger hover over the mouse, the system ready to register everything. The car stopped. The first to come down was Ashley. Firm face, chin up, posture of someone who thinks he won. Behind her came Evan, with his usual arrogant smile, as if the world owed him something. Afterward, his parents, Carl and Debbie, left excitedly, laughing, carrying suitcases, potted plants, and a picnic basket, as if they were moving to paradise. I saw Ashley point to the facade, explaining something with excitement. I know her well. He should be talking about the reforms they made, as if everything was their achievement. When I saw the gleam of satisfaction on her face, I felt something writhe inside her chest. It wasn't anger. It was an old sadness, the kind that we can't erase. We just learn to carry it. She walked to the door and for a moment looked at the sign Derek and I had left. "Automated system in test. Entry at your own risk." She frowned, tore off the paper with contempt and kneaded it. "Old dramatic," he murmured, and opened the door. At that very moment, the system recognized the movement. The interior lights turned on in sequence, one by one, until the entire house seemed awake. They came in, laughing, commenting on the smell of new wood. I clenched my fists, but remained silent. That house has always had a soul, and now, she was alive again, only for another purpose. I saw through the camera in the main room when Debbie took off her shoes and commented something about the floor. "It's beautiful. I can't believe it's ours now." Our. That word sounded like a knife. I whispered to myself, "No, Debbie, it's not." Evan started carrying his bags inside, organizing things as if he were already at home. Ashley leaned back on the couch and opened a bottle of wine. I watched every gesture, every smile. None of them suspected what was about to happen. And you know what's most curious? I didn't feel pleasure in seeing that. It was not a trap. It was a mirror. The house would only show them what they really are when no one is watching them. Derek had told me at the facility, "As soon as you cross the door, the system recognizes your presence, and everything that is scheduled answers." And it was. You're all set. The sensors knew where they were. The voices, the lights, the sounds. Every detail awaited an invisible command. I leaned back in my chair, took a deep breath, and thought of Elizabeth. If she were alive, she might say I was going too far. But at the same time, I knew she would understand. Because that wasn't revenge. It was the limit I never set. The limit that, if it had existed before, might have avoided all this pain. The clock struck 10:15. There they were, laughing, talking loudly, opening bottles and taking pictures. And I, 500 miles away, watched quietly, my heart beating slowly. Suddenly, Debbie's voice echoed. "Ashley, where are the new curtains? I want to put them on before I unload the rest." The daughter replied, "In the car. Evan will get it." And it was at that moment that the first sensor reacted. Discreet, almost imperceptible. The lights in the kitchen began to flicker. Evan stared at the ceiling, confused. It must be a power outage. Ashley laughed. "No, that's Daddy's thing. He loved these electronic systems." I leaned forward, attentive. The second sensor in the main room activated. A low sound, almost like a distant echo, ran through the room. Evan turned his head. "Did you hear that?" Carl replied. "The wind, perhaps." I smiled. It wasn't the wind. It was the first warning. On the other side of the screen, I saw the shadow cast on the hallway, an indistinct figure that moved on its own, thanks to the projection system. Debbie let out a short scream, and Ashley stood up, annoyed. "Dad, I know it's you. Stop it." She looked at one of the cameras as if I could hear her, and I could. But I was silent, because sometimes silence speaks louder than any words. The house, at that moment, began to react, and I didn't have to do anything. It was just a matter of observing. No, if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think, because there are stories that we tell not to be remembered, but to remember those who still think they can be erased. And there, that Sunday, I began to remember who I was. At 10:20, the system went into full mode. The lights flickered, voices began to echo through the rooms, and for the first time since it all began, I saw it on their faces. Fear, genuine fear. And what the house said right after, that's what changed everything. The house began to breathe. That's how I can describe that moment. It was as if the walls had a soul, an old, wounded soul, tired of being ignored. Through the cameras, I saw everything. Ashley was still in the room, arguing with Evan, saying that it was just a glitch in the system. Debbie laughed nervously, trying to disguise her fear. Carl, Evan's father, paced back and forth, examining switches, thinking he could find a way. And then came the first sentence. The voice echoed coldly, emotionlessly, but with an authority that made the air change. "You are on private property. Leave immediately." Debbie put her hand to her chest. "What was that?" Evan looked around, annoyed. "It's the old system. It must have turned on by itself." But the voice was repeated, this time firmer. "You are invading. This house does not belong to you." The sound seemed to come from all sides. They tried to understand, but the system reacted on its own, in sequence. The kitchen lights began to flicker in rapid, almost hypnotic patterns until they burst into a flash that made Debbie scream. Evan ran to the wall, trying to find the circuit breaker, but the lights came back, now red, pulsing slowly, like a heart. At the same moment, the taps began to open in all the rooms, water flowing, sounds echoing through the corridors. The whole house seemed alive. I saw Carl stumble into the dining room trying to hold his wife. "Someone turn it off," he shouted, but no one could. The system was in full defense mode, and there, in the midst of the confusion, Ashley stood still. The camera captured the exact moment when fear took over her face. It was no longer anger. It was dread. "Dad," she murmured, looking up at the ceiling. I felt a lump in my throat. She said, "Dad." It was the first time in months that that sound had come from her lips. But I didn't answer. I just watched, because at that moment it wasn't me who was speaking. It was the house. And the house remembered. The projection activated. Shading of human figures began to move on the walls, slowly crossing the rooms. Evan froze, his eyes wide. "There's someone here." Debbie began to cry. Ashley screamed, asking them to stop, but the system followed protocol. The voice, my voice, echoed again. "Respect what is not yours." The sentence cut through the air, and I, in front of the screen, didn't know whether to cry with sadness or relief. The justice that I could not achieve with words, the house was delivering in silence. And it's curious how life has its own ways of balancing the books. Sometimes, what we call punishment, it's just the truth asking to be heard. And that's why I ask you, stay here with me. Because the most memorable moment of my life was yet to come. And believe me, when the truth stood up inside that house, no one left the same. I watched as Evan tried to open the main door, but it stuck for 30 seconds, a time programmed to cause panic. He pulled the handle hard, cursing, sweating. Carl stumbled behind him. Debbie tried to pray, her eyes closed, her hands trembling. Ashley, cornered in the middle of the room, was crying without understanding. "What do you want from me?" he shouted to the ceiling, and the voice answered, soft, almost whispered, "Respect." It was at that moment that she collapsed. I saw my daughter fall to her knees, her face covered by her hands, asking for forgiveness for a space that she herself desecrated. "Dad, I'm sorry." The sound of her crying filled the house, and for a second, I wanted to turn everything off. I wanted to run there, hug, say enough was enough, but something inside me held on. I knew that if I interrupted it now, she would never learn. The deepest lessons don't come when someone yells at us. They come when silence forces us to listen to our own hearts. The system shut down on its own a few minutes later, leaving only the noise of dripping water and her muffled crying. I saw Evan sit on the floor, pale. Debbie hugged Carl, trembling, and Ashley standing in the middle of the room, looking around as if seeing it all for the first time. I, miles away, stared at the screen until the images stabilized. None of them spoke. The house finally was quiet. But what did she do next? It was what really marked them. Because the villa, like me, still had something to say. And it wasn't a request. It was a sentence. Debbie was the first to lose control. "I saw it on camera," she started screaming, clutching her chest, saying that the house was possessed. Carl tried to keep her up, but his face was already sweaty, red, not understanding what was happening. Evan paced back and forth, trying to look like he was in charge, but fear was already in his eyes. "This is some kind of virus in the system. I'll solve it," he shouted, pulling wires, pushing buttons, tripping over suitcases. The house responded to every move with an almost cruel calm. The lights went out, rekindled, the sound of footsteps echoed upstairs. Ashley, trembling, grabbed her phone. Dad, what have you done?" Her voice echoed through the room, and for the first time in a long time, I heard a trace of despair that wasn't pretense. I let the phone ring a few times before answering. When I answered, my voice came out firmly, unhurriedly, without anger. "The house knows who belongs to it." On the other end of the line, I only heard the sound of her crying and Evan telling her to hang up. The system recognized the noise of the call and automatically responded with one last sentence. "Property protected." It was enough for them to run to the main door, pushing each other. Evan tried to open the lock, but it was temporarily locked, exactly as planned. 30 seconds. 30 seconds of panic, screams, and despair. Debbie was crying. Carl was knocking on wood. Evan was kicking in the door. "Open it! Open it soon!" he bellowed, and Ashley tried to type something on her phone. Then finally the click. The latch released and they fell almost together outside, panting like someone fleeing a fire. I saw them on the outside camera, standing on the porch, looking at the house as if it were a monster. Ashley trembled. Evan cursed. Debbie sobbed. Carl held the phone, calling the police. I kept watching quietly, with the coffee cooling down next to me. When the vehicle arrived, 20 minutes later, 2 officers entered with flashlights in hand. They checked room by room, wrote everything down. Ashley followed them nervously, trying to explain. "He set it up. My father. It's a kind of torture." But the policeman, professional and restrained, came out after half an hour and said only, "Madam, there is nothing illegal here. It is a home automation system. Nothing that constitutes a crime." The silence that came after was almost beautiful. Evan tried to argue, but one of the officers just interrupted him. "If the property is in your father-in-law's name, you shouldn't be here." Those words fell heavy. Debbie started crying again. Carl lowered his head, and Ashley, she just stood there, without reaction, looking at the door of the house she tried to take. When they finally got in the car and drove away, the road was empty, and the reflection of the sun on the lake shone like a full stop. I watched until the last trace of dust disappeared over the horizon, and then I just closed the app. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a peace I hadn't felt in years. The house was quiet, yes, but it seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Me too. I leaned back in the chair and let my body relax, feeling a weight leave my chest. I didn't have to yell or argue or prove anything. I just had to let the truth speak in the place where it has always lived, within the walls I built. And you know what's curious? Some memories, even when they hurt, still carry the power to heal. They remind us of who we were and what we should never let be taken from us. Do something for me. If you have a memory like this that still marks you, write it in the comments. It can be just a phrase, a good memory, a longing. Sometimes, sharing what is left is the most beautiful way to move forward. I closed the laptop and stared at nothing, trying to process what had happened. I knew that day was going to change everything, but what I didn't know is that the real reckoning was yet to come, because the next day someone knocked on my door, and what that person told me, it turned everything upside down again. 2 days later, on a clear Tuesday, I was having coffee on the porch when the system alert flashed on my phone. Side entrance camera, motion detected. I opened the broadcast, and there they were again. Evan and a man in uniform, probably a technician. The son-in-law gesticulated, pointing to the front door, visibly annoyed. The other looked at the sensors with his hands in his pockets, evaluating. I zoomed in on the image, and could even hear part of the conversation. "I want to change all the locks, you know? Install new ones now," said Evan with that voice of someone trying to buy authority. The coach scratched his head. "Sir, this is high-level integration, automated security system. If I pull over, I can damage it and the insurance doesn't cover it. I don't even touch it." Evan snorted, kicked the grass and walked in circles. I just watched. The man said goodbye, refusing the service, and left. Evan stood there, arms crossed, looking home as if he were an enemy he couldn't defeat. Ashley appeared soon after, getting out of the car in a hurry. Her expression was one of pure anger. I talked to him, pointed my finger, screamed. I turned down the volume, but I read on her lips the phrase I was expecting. "You'll pay for this." When the cell phone vibrated again, it was her. A short, cold, almost rehearsed message. "You're going to pay for everything, Dad." I looked at the screen for a few seconds, but didn't answer. There was a time when those words would have destroyed me. Now, they only confirmed what I already knew. They still believed they could hit me. Little did they know that the game was already over. The afternoon before, Marcus and I had met in his office. It was a quiet, almost ceremonial meeting. He put the papers on the table and said, "James, once signed, there's no going back." I signed with a firm hand, without hesitation. The lake house now officially belonged to the Second Light Foundation, an institution that supported seniors without family. But the contract had a clause that Marcus personally wrote. Lifetime use right for me, and only for me. "No one's going to be able to touch that, James," he said, "nor contest. It is out of the reach of any relative." I closed the briefcase, took a deep breath, and replied, "So, finally, it's safe." Marcus looked at me with that silent respect that only those who understand the pain of a man alone can have. "You know, James, few people react to injustice so calmly. Most destroy. You preserved." I gave a half smile. Maybe because I've lost too much to want to destroy the rest. Now looking at the cameras, I knew that signing had been the final blow. They were fighting for a shade. The house they wanted would never be theirs again. The irony is that while they were fighting, the house was more alive than ever. I visited her the night before alone before completing the papers. I walked through the rooms, touched the walls, turned on the lights one by one. The house seemed to breathe with me, as if it understood that it was finally protected. I sat on the porch, looked at the lake, and stayed there for hours, listening to the sound of the water hitting the rocks. It was the first time in a long time that I felt peace. And it's funny, sometimes to get back what's yours, you have to stop owning it. That house was never about possession. It was about memory, about love, about respect. They never understood that. The sound of the phone brought me back to the present. New message. This time, not Ashley's. It was an unknown number. "Mr. Williams, this is Michael of the Second Light Foundation. We would like to thank you for your trust. The process has been successfully completed." I smiled. I kept my cell phone in my pocket and went to the kitchen to prepare another coffee. As the water warmed up, I watched the steam rise and thought, Elizabeth would have approved, because she has always believed that true love leaves a trace, even when it is hurt. And in that gesture, donating the house, turning it into something bigger, I felt like I was somehow giving back to the world a piece of her goodness. Around 6 in the afternoon, the cell phone vibrated once again. "Ashley." Another message. "You don't answer me because you're afraid. But Evan's lawyer will solve it. You're not going to win." I just deleted the message and hung up the phone. She still didn't understand that there was nothing more to gain or lose. I had already won, and without having to hurt anyone. When the sun went down, the room was dipped in a beautiful orange. I took Elizabeth's picture from the bookshelf and watched it. Liz, I made our home what it always was. Shelter. Not for them, but for those who really need it. I was silent, listening to the distant sound of the wind hitting the windows. And in that instant, I realized that the house was not the only place that had freed itself. I was too. But fate had not yet ended with me, because the next morning Marcus called me, and what he told me, it made me realize that the peace I thought I had achieved would still be tested in a way I would never have imagined. It was a silent Thursday when I heard the doorbell ring. I didn't wait for anyone. The sound echoed through the house like an ancient warning, one of those that the heart understands before the head. I went to the door slowly, already feeling the weight of what was waiting for me on the other side. When I opened it, there they were, Ashley and Evan, she with her arms crossed, her eyes hard, he with a tense expression, trying to look in control. "Can we come in?" she asked, not looking me in the eye. I took a step aside. "They can." They entered without thanking, without greeting. The air became heavy, the kind of silence that precedes storms. She went straight to the point. "You have crossed all limits, Dad. We will sue you. Psychological torture, emotional abuse, whatever it takes." Evan added, his voice controlled but trembling. "You had no right to expose us to that. It was cruel. The house almost killed my mother of the heart." I listened to them in silence. I waited for them to finish. When the words finally ceased, I said calmly, "Sit down." They looked at each other, hesitated, but obeyed. I walked to the office and came back with a black briefcase in my hands. I placed it on the table and opened it slowly, showing the first pages. The house. It's not mine anymore. The silence that came was almost beautiful. "What do you mean?" Ashley asked, frowning. "It's on behalf of the Second Light Foundation. It was donated legally, and the foundation's lawyer has already registered the transfer." Evan turned pale. What did you do?" I continued without changing my tone. "Full donation, but with a lifetime use clause. Until the last day of my life, that house will be rightfully mine. After that, it will be a shelter for those who really need a home." Ashley stood up, trembling. "You destroyed our family." I took a deep breath and replied, looking her straight in the eye. "Family, Ashley, don't take the house from a widowed parent. Family does not manipulate the pain of those who have lost everything. Family does not lie, nor does it try to erase what it has not built. You made choices. I just gave the limits back." She stared at me as if she expected me to give in. I didn't give in. Evan ran his hand over his face, not knowing what to say. "You did it to humiliate us." "No," I said. "I did it to protect myself, and to remember that dignity is not given. It is maintained." She laughed, but the laughter came mixed with tears. "You're going to die alone, Dad, and he will deserve it." I let the phrase hang in the air. "Maybe," I replied, "but I'm going to die in peace, something you haven't learned to buy yet." She lowered her gaze. For a moment I thought I was going to say something different, ask for forgiveness perhaps, but no. He just took his bag and stood up. "Come on, Evan." He hesitated, looked at me for a second, and said, in a tone that almost seemed regretful, "You could have made it easier, and you could have treated me like a father." He looked away, and the two left without saying goodbye. The door closed slowly, and the sound of the latch seemed like an end point. I stood there, staring at nothing. The clock on the wall marked 11:14 a.m., and the time, for the first time, seemed to be moving in my favor. I walked to the window and saw their car driving away. No wave, no look back, just the distant sound of the engine and the dust rising on the street. The house fell silent, and in that silence I realized that peace comes at a high price, but it's worth every penny. I sat at the table, looked at the open documents, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. For the first time, I didn't owe anyone anything. There was nothing more to explain nor anything to fix. The past could rest. I closed the folder, kept it in the drawer, and, on impulse, turned on the kettle to make coffee. While the water was boiling, I thought of Elizabeth. "Liz," I murmured, "if you were here, you'd say I should forgive, and maybe one day I'll forgive, but today I just want to breathe." I drank my coffee slowly, looking at the sun hitting the leaves in the garden. Life had returned to sound, color, smell. I was alone. Yes, but not empty. There was a kind of silence in me that didn't hurt, the silence of someone who had finally chosen himself. And it was in this silence that the phone rang. I looked at the viewfinder. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Williams?" said a female voice. "I'm from the Second Light Foundation. We need to talk about a property visit. There's something you need to know." His voice trembled slightly. My heart raced. "What happened?" I asked. "It's about your daughter," she replied. "I think you should come." The day after that call, I woke up with a knot in my chest. I went to the balcony, the sun still rising, and stood still, trying to understand what that woman from the foundation meant. "It's about your daughter." These words kept spinning in my head, as if time had run around them again. I called there immediately, and the girl, in a soft voice, explained to me that Ashley had shown up at the villa, alone, crying, saying she needed to see her dad. I listened to everything in silence. She didn't do any damage, she didn't try to force her in, she just sat on the porch steps for hours looking at the lake. It seemed, "Sorry, Mr. Williams," said the employee. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and stared at nothing. Sorry. That word, said like this, suddenly sounded strange to me. Too late. Over the next few days, I started getting messages from her. The first, short. I went crazy. Then another, hours later. "Do you still love me?" I read them all. I didn't answer any. Not out of anger, but out of something I learned late in life. When the wound begins to heal, you don't poke it again. And silence, in this case, was my way of saying, "I heard, but I won't come back." Ashley kept insisting. "Dad, I messed up. Evan pressured me. I just wanted to help. I miss you." I read, left my cell phone on the table, and let time do what it does best. Teach. Her life, she later learned, began to fall apart little by little. Debbie and Carl sold the big car, moved to a small apartment in Sacramento. The money that Evan promised, the plans that he talked about with such certainty, did not exist. His business went bankrupt, and the friends disappeared. And it's curious how the world sometimes returns lessons without us having to ask. What they tried to wrest from me, stability, dignity, peace, was exactly what they lost first. I just kept living. He walked every morning, greeted the neighbors, took care of the plants that Elizabeth left. Sometimes, when the silence of the house seemed too deep, I would make coffee and let the smell fill the rooms, as if calling the memory of her to keep me company. And in this calm pace, I realized one thing. The real victory is not in seeing others fall, but in realizing that we survived in one piece. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Like this video and sign up, and let's make this story reach those who need it. I was getting news of Ashley by the winds of chance. A mutual friend told me that she and Evan were separating, that she had returned to work in a small real estate company far from the city, that I cried a lot, and that I spoke my name with a kind of shame that is not disguised. I listened to everything calmly, and for the first time, I felt something like compassion. Not the compassion of those who forgive, but of those who understand. She was tasting the bitter taste of the choices she made. Debbie and Carl, who laughed so hard at me on the balcony of the villa, now lived modestly, without the arrogance that defined them. And Evan, well, I didn't know anything more about him. Some said he moved to Texas, trying to start over. Others, that he returned to his parents' house. I don't know. And to be honest, I didn't want to know. What was enough for me was to know that life had put each one in their proper place. Justice sometimes does not come in courts, but in late reflexes. And I began to understand that when you act truthfully, time works for you. People can lie, steal, betray, manipulate, but time cannot. He observes. It weighs, and sooner or later, he gives it back. Some nights when I missed her, I would take out my cell phone and reread her messages. "Do you still love me? Can I visit you? Dad, I just want to talk." And each time I read, I felt less anger and more distance. It was like looking at an old photograph, familiar but untouchable, a memory of someone who existed but is no longer there. And inside me, I realized that something had changed. I no longer wanted an answer, neither hers nor anyone else's. I just wanted to live the rest of my days in peace, honoring what was left of the good, the memory of Elizabeth, the sound of the lake, and the certainty that I didn't lose myself. Sometimes, when the wind blew stronger, I had the impression of hearing Elizabeth's voice in the backyard. "You did what you should, James." And I smiled, looking at the sky. Because yes, I did. I didn't scream. I didn't lower myself. I didn't return with hatred. I just let time show the truth. And he did. But little did I know that at that same time there was still one last surprise for me. Something that would come from an unexpected place, bringing back a feeling that I thought I had already buried forever. I traveled alone. No rush, no warning, no cameras. It was early. The sun had barely broken through the clouds, and the road to Lake Tahoe seemed different, less harsh, quieter. I took with me only a small suitcase, a thick coat, and the old porcelain cup that Elizabeth loved. At every turn I felt that I was getting closer not only to the house but to myself. When I parked in front of the villa, it was quiet. No sound, no sign of life, just the light wind swaying the trees. For a moment I stood there looking at the facade. That house had seen it all. The love, the pain, the loss, the betrayal. And now she was waiting for me, serene, as if to say to me, "Come back, but come in peace." I opened the door slowly. The air inside was different, clean, cold. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls with my fingertips. Each touch seemed to awaken a memory. Elizabeth choosing the curtains, Ashley as a child laughing in the hallway, me sitting on the porch reading the newspaper. Everything was there, alive, but weightless. I went into the kitchen and grabbed the old coffee maker. The sound of coffee rising brought me a peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I used the white cup with a small sliver on the rim, the one Elizabeth never let me throw away. I sat at the table and watched the steam rise, as if it were a gentle ghost. The smell of coffee mixed with old wood filled the air, and I realized that there was no anger inside me anymore, only absence. And absence, when it stops hurting, becomes space. The house was at peace, and so was I. I walked to the master bedroom where there was still a photograph of us. Me, Elizabeth, and Ashley the first week after we finished construction. Everyone was smiling, the sun hitting her face. I took the picture frame in my hands and cleaned it carefully. "Liz, you would have cried seeing what all this has become," I muttered. But I think that in the end I managed to do what I promised. I protected what was ours. I was silent for a while. And there in that room that kept so many beginnings and so many ends, I realized something simple and profound. I didn't want anyone to pay for anything anymore. I just wanted to remember it painlessly. It's funny how we spend half our lives trying to prove that we're strong when, in fact, the real strength is knowing how to be quiet. Accept. Let go. Move on. I went down to the deck, sat on the wooden chair, and stared at the reflection of the lake. The water was so still that you could see the whole sky in it. And that's when the feeling came. The house was no longer a burden. It was a mirror. Everything I had lived, learned, lost, was reflected in her, and I could finally look without fear. The wind hit my face lightly, and for a second I felt as if Elizabeth was there sitting next to me. The same way of crossing your legs, the same comfortable silence. I closed my eyes and let time pass. I don't know how long I stayed there, but when I opened my eyes again, the sun was already going down, painting the lake gold. And you know, sometimes life takes time to give back what we gave, but when it returns, it brings it back in a calmer, more beautiful way. If you've come this far with me, I want you to know, the most memorable moment in my story is yet to come. And when it did, it taught me that true love doesn't need a stage or an audience, just really. When night fell, I lit a lamp and sat on the porch listening to the sound of crickets and water hitting the rocks. For the first time, I didn't think about what I lost, but about what I still had. The house, memory, myself. I took the old guitar that was leaning against the wall and played the melody that Elizabeth liked to sing. The sound was simple, out of tune, but sincere. When I finished, I laughed to myself. I still remember the chords, Liz. And in that laughter, there was something I hadn't felt since the day I lost her. Lightness. I put the guitar away, closed the windows, and went upstairs to the bedroom. Before going to bed, I looked one last time out the window. The lake shone under the full moon, tranquil as if to say, "It's over." I believed it. I lay down and let sleep take me, with a calm heart and a light mind. But fate, as always, still had one more turn. Because the next morning when I woke up, I found an envelope on the porch addressed to me. No sender. And what was inside? Everything changed again. The next morning, I found the envelope on the balcony table, the yellowed paper, the name written in delicate handwriting, Mr. Williams. I opened it carefully, imagining that it was some communication from the foundation. Inside there was only a brief letter, inviting me to receive a visitor on Sunday, a volunteer who wanted to hand over some documents and have tea with me if I accepted. I signed the acceptance and went back to my chores. On Sunday, the day dawned calm, with the calm lake and the smell of pine spread by the wind. I prepared the house, lit the fire in the fireplace, and left the kettle on the stove. At 3 in the afternoon, the sound of a car parking broke the silence. I went down to the gate and saw a young woman, about 30 years old perhaps, coming out with a briefcase in her hands. "Mr. Williams?" he asked with a smile. "I'm Emily from the Second Light Foundation." Her voice was firm but sweet, one of those who have a natural way of welcoming. I invited her in. She looked at the house in awe, walking slowly. "It's even more beautiful than in the photos. You can feel that it was made with love." I felt a slight tightness in my chest. "Yes, it was," I replied. "Every wall here has memories." We sat in the kitchen, and while I was making tea, she opened the briefcase and pulled out some papers. "They are foundation documents, sir. We wanted to thank you for the donation. Since your home was registered, we've been able to inspire others to do the same. We already have 3 new properties being transformed into shelters for the elderly and veterans." She said that with a twinkle in her eye that disarmed me. I just shook my head, unable to say much. "You know, you may not imagine, but what you did changed lives. There are people who will sleep under a safe roof because of their choice." I was silent, stirring the tea. The sound of the spoon hitting the cup seemed louder than it should be. "I only did what I thought was right," I muttered. "The house has always been a shelter. It was only fair that it should continue to be." Emily smiled. "My father said exactly that." I looked at her, curious. "Your father?" She nodded, her eyes fixed on the fireplace flame. "I lost him when I was 17. He was a simple man, but he had a heart like the Lord's. He worked with wood, made toys for children in the neighborhood, and he always said that what we build with love is never lost. It just changes shape." I felt the lump going up in my throat. Her voice had a tone of longing that I knew well. "He must be a good man," I replied. "It was the best." We stayed quiet for a while, drinking the tea. The sun came through the window, illuminating her face in a serene way. Then Emily laughed softly and said, "I'm sorry. I'm talking too much. I just wanted you to know that, for many people, you have become an example." "Me?" I asked, surprised. "I'm just an old man trying to get it right after making so many mistakes." She looked at me in a gentle way. "But that's what makes it different. Good examples are never born perfect, they are born human." Those words hit me like a hug. It had been a long time since I had heard someone speak to me like this. Without judgment, without interest, only with truth. She finished tea and began to organize the papers. "Before I go, I wanted to ask for something personal. Can I?" "Of course," I replied. "My father taught me to thank you by looking into the eyes. So, thank you, Mr. Williams, for what he has done and for what he represents. People like you remind the world that there is still quiet goodness." I didn't know what to say. He just smiles, unable to hide his emotion. She got up, took her bag, and when she was almost at the door, she turned around. "Oh, and sorry." I think for a moment I felt like I was talking to my dad. I stood still, my words stuck in my throat. "You can call me that if you want," I managed to say. She smiled, and in that smile there was a tenderness that crossed time. "Thank you, Mr. Thank you, James." The sound of the name coming out of her voice was soft, almost familiar. After she left, I spent a while looking out the window, watching the car disappear on the road. The house seemed warmer, more alive. I sat down at the table again, looked at the empty cup and felt something new. Belonging. Not the belonging of those who have something, but of those who are something. For the first time in years I felt seen, not as the father of someone who had forgotten me, but as someone who could still inspire care in another heart. Life has these beautiful ironies. When you think you've lost the right to be called dad, it puts someone in your path to remind you that true love never dies. It just changes address. I stood there smiling to myself and thought, maybe Elizabeth sent me this message from somewhere, but I had no idea that Emily would still cross my path again, and when that happened, she would bring with her news that would completely change the course of my final years. The following months passed slowly. the way time goes when the soul is at peace. I started organizing my things not in a hurry, but out of a desire to keep everything clean. Every drawer, every memory, every piece of paper that once told part of my story. I opened the old wooden box where Elizabeth kept the house bills and found her notes, shopping lists, drawings of Ashley as a child. I felt my heart tighten, but at the same time, a strange warmth, the kind of memory that hurts and comforts at the same time. I took a new sheet of paper and started writing. A letter to each person who, in some way, crossed my life with respect. The gardener who took care of the lawn, the guy at the market who always asked about my health, the nurse who helped me after the surgery. Simple but sincere words. Life has taught me that saying thank you ahead of time is a way of not leaving anything unfinished. I also decided to donate what I had left over, a small amount to the foundation, another to a technical school in the neighborhood where I started working as a young man. I wanted the little I had left to move forward, building on what was still missing in others. I went back to visit some places that I moved away from over time. The old street where my father and I mixed cement when we still dreamed of the first venture, the park where I took Ashley to her birthdays, to the small field where Elizabeth liked to sit to read. In each of these places, someone recognized me. "You're Williams, aren't you? The one who helped in the community school? The gentleman who donated the land for popular housing? The gentleman who never shouted but solved everything?" I smiled, surprised that they still remembered. Sometimes recognition comes from where we least expect it, not from applause but from the memory of others. And that's what sustained me, to realize that even in the hours when I thought I was alone, the good I did was still alive around, walking on my own legs. One day I received a formal letter from the local government. It was an invitation. The city of San Diego wanted to honor me with a civic award for social and humanitarian contribution. I read it and laughed softly. I thought about how curious life is. The same man who was forgotten by his daughter would now be remembered by the whole city. I kept the envelope in the drawer and did not answer. The following week, I saw the news on television. A full auditorium, the mayor speaking, and on the screen my old photo, in a suit and a shy smile. James Williams, retired businessman, responsible for several community actions that transformed neighborhoods in our city. I sat there with a cup of hot tea in my hands watching the tribute in silence. I didn't go. I didn't have to go. That was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't for me. It was for the boy I once was, for the man who worked in silence, for the husband who loved, for the father who tried. The camera showed people applauding, and I felt a kind of peace that doesn't fit into words. The most beautiful applause is the one we hear inside, when we realize that despite everything we were faithful to what we believed. Night fell slowly. I turned off the TV and stared at the reflection of the light in the window. Outside, the wind blew lightly, bringing the distant sound of the sea. I took the pen and wrote one more letter, the last one. It wasn't for Ashley, or for anyone else in particular. It was for me. I wrote, "You survived, James, without having to scream, without lowering yourself, without losing what made you whole. May your peace no longer depend on any forgiveness that has not come." I folded the paper and put it inside the same envelope in which I kept the first photo of me and Elizabeth, still young, dirty with paint, smiling in front of the newly built house. I put everything in the closet and closed it slowly. The next day, I woke up early and went for a walk. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that seems to promise a fresh start. I passed children going to school, old people sitting on the bench in the square, and a group of workers renovating a building. One of them recognized me and waved. "Good morning, Mr. Williams," I replied with a timid nod. And for a moment I realized that maybe this was the real legacy. Not the walls I built, not the bills I paid, but the way my calm was imprinted on others. The silence that once seemed empty to me was now a shelter. I stopped at the corner, looked at the sky, and thanked him. I didn't need anything else, or at least that's what I thought, until the phone rang that same afternoon. It was a familiar number, from the foundation, and the voice on the other end sounded different, emotional. "Mr. Williams, it's about Emily. Something has happened and you need to know." I finished writing the letter on the terrace with the wind blowing lightly and the smell of the lake reminding me that time, when it wants, also knows how to be kind. I wrote each line calmly, without rancor, without weight, only with truth. "Ashley, you thought the house was a trophy, but it was a temple, a place where your mother laughed, where you learned to swim, where life still embraced me. When you tried to take it, you didn't take a house. He tried to steal my story. I closed the envelope and put it inside a small wooden box with our old photos. Elizabeth in a straw hat, Ashley still a girl, me smiling without knowing how much the world would still change. Maybe this letter will never get anywhere. Maybe one day it will, and that's okay. There are things that do not need a destination, only closure. I looked around and realized that everything was in the right place. Debbie and Carl now lived quietly in Sacramento, selling homemade pies. Evan learned from friends, quit his career and moved to the interior of Texas. Ashley went on with her life, estranged but alive, trying to start over. I, in turn, followed as well. Emily continued to visit the house, taking care of the foundation's new projects. Sometimes it brings flowers, sometimes just silence, and in both things there is affection. In recent months she has become a kind of daughter of the soul, the kind that life gives us when blood is no longer what binds, but respect. And I, old that I am, learned to accept that love doesn't always come back from where we told it to, but it comes back. It always comes back, by another way. Today, when I walk across the deck and see the reflection of the lake, I don't miss anything. Neither of the house as good, nor of the daughter as an idea, nor of life as before. I feel only gratitude. Gratitude for having survived what broke me without having to break anyone. I learned finally that a man's greatest victory is not in recovering what he lost, but in not losing who he is. Forgiveness, I discovered, is not saying, it's okay, but being able to breathe without pain when we remember. And life? Life continues to be this mix of tide and breeze, where what remains is what we water with kindness. If you have come this far with me, thank you. Really. His company, even in silence, makes me feel that my words still find an echo in some heart. And if this story touched you, give me a hug in the form of a like. It warms up more than you think. If you want to come back for another coffee and another sincere conversation, subscribe to the channel. I want to know where you're listening to me from. What city, what corner of the world your story comes from. Leave it in the comments, because it's beautiful to know how far affection can go. And it activates the bell, so you don't lose it when the coffee is ironed again. Today, as the sun bids farewell on the horizon, I realize that the house was never a prize. It was a mirror. It only reflected who I was and who I needed to be again. And if every story has an end, let mine be like this. In peace with a clean heart and a light soul. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.